Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it was a great pleasure today to uh, greet you for at least two reasons. First reason is that today it's the first lecture of the newly established group for religious studies or study of religion. As you might know, Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory was an institute established in the 80s of the last century, and it was an institute which actually criticized at that time the authorities from the leftist point of view. Religion was not something which was very prominent, and study of religion was much more a critic of religion than like analyzing and interpreting different religious tradition. But as time changes and the religion started to play a very important role in a modern society, we decided to start a religious group and or the group for a study of religion and to study religion as such, but to study as well the different religious traditions. Not only Christianity, which is considered to be kind of dominant religion on this on the Balkans, but also Islam, which is also a part of the tradition and something that we can say belong to the people in this region. The second reason is because today's lectures is a good friend, Professor Thomas Mark Németh from University of Vienna, and who is coming with a very timely subject. As you might know, the war in Ukraine and especially the religious landscape of Ukraine in our society is described or portrayed, I would say, in black and white colors. Today, we have a possibility to get much more color than it is done so far. And this is for true reason, because Professor Németh is a researcher and a professor of Eastern Christian Studies of the University of Vienna, and this is a very prominent institute and very prominent school for the research of Eastern Christianity. And he is a specialist for Ukraine. His dissertation was of Ukrainian Church. But also, he's not only a scholar, he is a practicant, he's a priest in Greco-Catholic Ukrainian Church. He's somebody who lives with the community and who lives for the community. And his community is deeply affected during this war. And this reason we can have two perspectives, which I think will be intervened in his talk. One perspective from academic perspective and academic interpretation, and the other is religious. Just a few words. As I said, Professor Németh is professor of Eastern Christian Studies at the Faculty of Catholic Theology at the University of Vienna. Since 2019. Before, he was worked at the University of Würzburg in Germany at the Eastern Christian Studies Institute, which is another prominent institute in the German-speaking world about Eastern Christianity. And he also is known in ecumenical circles, working as a consultant for the Orthodox Catholic Pro Oriente, and also a member of steering committee for Orthodox Catholic Dialogue and co-chair of Orthodox Eastern Catholic Group. Thomas, it is a great pleasure to have you today. Please take the floor.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, hello, dear participants. Thank you very much, dear colleague Vladimir, for this introduction, and First of all, I would like to thank very much the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory for inviting me to speak here. It's an honor for me to present such a topic here in Belgrade. I'm also thankful about the presence of Director Gazela Puda Draško, who is here, and Ambassador of Ukraine, Volodymyr Tolkač. Duže vam ďakujem za vašu prisutnost. But I will continue in English. Let me tell you that it would have been easier for me to speak here about historical topics of my research, like the churches in the Habsburg Empire in the 19th century, and not about the war in Europe. But I'm convinced that what happens in Ukraine today is especially very important for whole Europe. So on the one hand, it might be more convenient to present a topic to which I can look from a distance. However, I think there are critical moments in history where it is also a part of a mission of academics to see and to read the signs of the time, not to stay away, even get closer and even take sides. Russian missiles are destroying cities and killing people. I mean, just a few kilometers from my mother-in-law's apartment in Lviv, and there is the signal that you can't be safe anywhere. It applies to the whole of Ukraine, unfortunately. I don't have to show you pictures of the many destroyed towns in eastern Ukraine or explain what the coming winter will mean if the energy infrastructure is destroyed. But if it comes to an issue such as human rights, respect of international law, or ethical criteria, I think responsibility is also an academic category, and it's important to contribute to reflection. This war started by Russia in 2014. In 2022, there was the large-scale invasion, and you see Ukrainians are defending their country, working to achieve just peace. They're acting and praying. And I speak here as an outsider, insider, because I have no Ukrainian roots, but my personal academic path has led me to explore the Ukrainian churches and become a priest of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. And yeah, we see that religion is a very ambivalent issue. I mean, especially in this war, it's a certain part of the problem, hopefully also a part of the solution, and in any case, a part of this very complex reality. And war has important implications for the churches and religious communities there, also for their relationship with each other and for global orthodoxy. So I will start with an overview of the religious landscape in Ukraine and focus in particular on the country's two Orthodox jurisdictions, which has a very complex relationship to each other, but also to state and society. I will mention aspects of peace, ethics, the role of church actors, and the influence of historical and ideological factors. And finally, there is also the question about maybe a constructive role of churches and academic theology also in the future. But let me start now with describing the religious landscape in Ukraine, and it's a diverse landscape. And first of all, I would like to present briefly some historical facts. Historically, Byzantine Christianity in Ukraine, in its Orthodox and Greek Catholic branches, goes back to the baptism of the Kievan Rus in 988 under Grand Duke Volodymyr. This medieval empire that existed from the 9th century onwards, Christianity was adopted in the Byzantine form, and Kiev Metropolitanate was a daughter church of the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople. After the Mongol invasion in the 13th century, the empire collapsed, resulting in the formation of two, partly also three ecclesiastical jurisdictions or metropolitanates. The Metropolitanate under Lithuanian, Polish-Lithuanian, later Polish rule, and the jurisdiction was on the other hand shifted to Moscow, but they both understood themselves in the succession of the Kievan Metropolitanate. In Moscow in 1448, the Metropolitan was elected without the consent of Constantinople, so that until 5089 there was an unclear canonical situation until a leading Orthodox patriarch established an independent patriarchate. With the expansion of Russian territories, the Orthodox Kievan Metropolitanate was incorporated in the Russian Orthodox Church in 1686, which is a controversial matter in terms of canon law. The Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, this is a later name, Greek Catholic as a name starts under Maria Theresa. This church originates also from the Kiev Metropolitanate under Polish rule, which joined the Roman See at the Union of Brest in 1595-96. And this church was forcibly dissolved by Stalin in 1946, survived this period up to 1989 in the underground and as a diaspora church. Islam and Judaism have also an old presence in the territory of Ukraine since the time of the Kievan Rus, Protestantism since the 16th, 17th century. Roman Catholicism has mainly Polish roots. So Ukraine has a diverse landscape that is characterized by a high degree of tolerance. I mean, the fact that no one religion or church has an overly dominant role and that there is a healthy degree of competition are generally positive factors for a pluralistic society. Since the 1990s, there has been competition between three Orthodox jurisdictions, the so-called Ukrainian Orthodox Church belonging to the Moscow Patriarchate, and two not canonical churches, the Kievan Patriarchate and the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church. Since 2019, there are two churches. We will see this a bit later. And this conflict is, of course, a disruptive factor in society, but with mainly local conflicts. However, surveys show that the religious affiliation is not too important for Ukrainians' identification, so these problems also should not be overestimated. I show you now a picture. I have to put it this direction. Yeah. Somehow. Am I not in the right position? Maybe I tried from here before. Oh, yeah. You see, it's difficult with technical issues. Now, you can see the All Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, which was founded in 1996, representing over 95% of the religious sector. This council repeatedly makes statements also during the war and is, let's say, theologically quite conservative in gender issues, etc. There is no exact religious statistics in Ukraine, but every year there are surveys, especially by the Razumkov Center, and they show that 71% of Ukrainians believe in God. In the West they are 60, in the West they are 84, in the East 60%. And regarding affiliation, the Orthodox are at around 61%, Greek Catholics 11, Roman Catholics 1, Protestants also 1, although 1 year before they were counted almost at 4%. Jews and Muslims are in the range of 0.1, 0.2, and 11% describe themselves as Christians only, not denominational at 14%. Orthodoxy, apart from few distinct groups, is divided into two jurisdictions. The first is the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which until 2022 was clearly affiliated to the Moscow Patriarchate, and which at its ecclesiastical assembly, Bishop Sobor, in May 2022 issued a declaration of a kind of administrative independence from Moscow by changing its statutes. However, in my opinion, it's more like a demarcation it doesn't mean formally leaving the Moscow Patriarchate, so that the Moscow Patriarchate and the other Orthodox churches still regard the Ukrainian Orthodox Church belonging to the Moscow Patriarchate, and so does the state, as we will see. The second church is the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which was formed in 2018 by a merger of Ukrainian churches that had not been predominantly recognized by the Orthodox Church as a whole. So that's the Kievan Patriarchate and the Autocephalous Church, plus 2 bishops of the Moscow Patriarchate. It's headed by Metropolitan Epiphany. And this church was recognized as autocephalous by the Patriarchate of Constantinople in early 2019. And, you know, as a result, the Moscow Patriarchate unilaterally terminated its ecclesiastical communion with the aforementioned Patriarchate, the Ecumenical Patriarchate, until now. The two Orthodox churches differ in that the Orthodox Church of Ukraine has a clear patriotic orientation, maybe also a bit nationalistic tendencies, while the Ukrainian Orthodox Church has several political and church political wings, from pro-Western to pro-Russian. And it's not simple to say whether this kind of demarcation from Moscow was a result of an independent conviction or whether it was a result of internal ecclesiastical or even social pressure. But it's important to stress that after the large-scale invasion of Russia in 22, both Orthodox churches and all religions spoke out in defense of Ukraine. The unclear status of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and also the passivity of its ecclesiastical leadership, Metropolitan Onufry, had provoked a lot of criticism in Ukrainian society. Parts of the clergy and faithful tried to promote dialogue with the other church, but the bishops, well, not really supported approximation. Moreover, parishes are moving from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, around 1,700 since 2019. Not so many today, maybe 10 in a month, but it's a problem. And at present, it's unlikely that the two churches will recognize each other, because also the Ukrainian Orthodox Church refuses to accept the validity of the sacraments of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which is also a problem in worldwide Orthodoxy. The statistics now show that only 6% of those survived identify with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, but 42% with the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. You can see it here. The number of the first church has fallen rapidly in recent years. And there is also a group of 13% who consider themselves just Orthodox. At the same time, you can see that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church still has more congregations than the other church, 1,500 and 8,000. So it's not easy to say which church is the larger, because sympathy values do not mean that people who are baptized Orthodox are also practicing Orthodox. So that's, how to say, an open question. And by the way, you can also see that the Protestants also have 9,000 congregations, a lot for the 1 to 2%. Now I go back with another topic, church and state. Measures by the state against Russian influence in the religious sector and also de facto against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church are currently causing much controversy, as you know. This is linked to a change of direction in the Ukrainian state leadership religious policy at the end of 2022, because under President Volodymyr Zelensky, the government has for a long time largely stayed out of the long-running internal Orthodox conflicts, even after the start of the February invasion. However, from October 2022, the situation changed, and in the light of accusations of collaboration, raids were carried out on Ukrainian Orthodox Church institutions, sanctions were imposed on some of its representatives, and the main churches of the Cave Monastery in Kiev, the Pechelska Lavra, were no longer made available to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church on major holidays, but to the rival Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Contributing to these measures was the Ukrainian Orthodox Church's leadership's inaction in response to accusations of state collaboration, that they did not react to the taking of the eparchies by the Moscow Patriarchate, its closed attitude, unwillingness to engage in dialogue with state and society, and also its lack of will to confront its problematic role over the past decades. Although the raids have only shed light on not many cases of collaboration, the church is often seen in public as a soft power of the Moscow Patriarchate. And Russia's war against Ukraine has confirmed the public opinion that Russia's church structures should have no place in Ukraine. The efforts towards an Orthodox jurisdiction that is independent of Moscow and also recognized worldwide dates back to the first half of the 20th century. You know, that's a longer development, and it's therefore unpleasant for the Ukrainian Orthodox Church leadership that it is still considered as a part of the Moscow Patriarchate, according to a state commission expert report from 22, despite the attempt at demarcation a year before. Ukraine has a very liberal religious law from 1991, even passed before the end of the Soviet Union. And in December 22, the Constitutional Court of Ukraine declared an amendment to this law as constitutional, which required religious organizations with the headquarters in the aggressor state, that means in Russia, to explicitly indicate the affiliation to this center in the name, but it could not be enforced. And concerns have been raised about this in relation to international standards on religious freedom, and also against a number of draft laws that were directed against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in a way that really does not meet international criteria of religious freedom. In August 24, the parliament, the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, adopted the law of Ukraine on the protection of the constitutional order in the sphere of religious organizations, the law number 3894-9. It states, I quote the law, given that the Russian Orthodox Church is an ideological extension of the aggressor state regime and an accomplice to war crimes and crimes against humanity committed on behalf of the Russian Federation, its activities in Ukraine are prohibited. So according to the law, religious organizations affiliated with the Russian Orthodox Church must withdraw from it. There is a procedure for this, and the State Service of Ukraine for Ethnic Affairs and Freedom of Conscience, DESS, conducts an investigation to determine if there is such an affiliation and will require to withdraw. And religious organizations that are regarded as affiliated will have 9 months to cut ties with the governing center in Russia. Even before the start of such proceeding, the authorities can take state or public property from the lease of such structures. According to an examination by the DESS from 22, which is however criticized by some scholars like, for example, Thomas Bremer, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is part of the Russian Orthodox Church. However, the law contains no automatic ban. There is this procedure with a court decision that can be contested. And in Ukraine, you must know religious organizations as a whole, unlike the congregations and centers, are not legal entities, which means that a complete ban on a church is unlikely to be enforceable. Bans can affect mainly leadership structures, congregations, and there are many of them. Although some commentators state otherwise, it would be enough, according to the law, that the withdrawal from the Russian Orthodox Church is given from the Ukrainian side and to break ties with the Russian Church. Let's maybe take a look back now. In April 24, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe recognized the Russian Orthodox Church as an instrument of the Kremlin's Ruski Mir propaganda. And in the same month, the Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, which I mentioned, stated that no organization with a governing center in the aggressor state should operate in Ukraine. This body also stressed that even today religious freedom is highly respected in Ukraine. In contrast to this, and this is important, the Russian Orthodox Church has acted in Ukraine as a big danger for religious freedom. I mean, since 2014, Russia has destroyed more than, I think, 600 religious buildings. Priests were killed, and only the Russian Church can operate in the temporarily occupied territories. It must be, however, stated also that this law also, let me quote, had raised serious concerns regarding the freedom of religion in September by the UN Human Rights Office. The law has gone through several phases and was also criticized by the DESS in the former version. And also religious law scholars raise some concerns. I mean, they are juridically unclear areas, such as the term Ruski Mir. Other raise concerns if this ban is really the ultima ratio, whether existing legislation is not enough maybe, and if the law can achieve its goal. Also, national security is not identified as a legitimate limitation to religious practice in the international covenants and in most of the European constitutions. What about the churches? Ukrainian Church, Ukrainian Orthodox Church is contra, Orthodox Church of Ukraine is pro, and interestingly, the head of my church, Major Archbishop Sviatoslav Shevchuk of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, spoke out against a ban on churches at the beginning of 23, also from the experience of an underground church, but he recently stated that this law does not ban the church, but protects the churches from being instrumentalized as a weapon. If you see, I have to sigh. I mean, such interventions are very delicate, especially in a situation of war. And I also think of the vast majority of the members of the church who I think are loyal Ukrainians should not be collectively punished. And you see also the Ukrainian Orthodox Church feels it is being treated unfairly by the state. There are such complaints. And there are also some signs that freedom of expression might be partially curtailed. In addition to the political interference in the church sphere, an escalation of religious conflict at this time could be counterproductive for the country, could play into Moscow's hand. The issue is already being used by the Kremlin and the Moscow Patriarchate as an argument before international organizations. But I think this law should be considered from several sides without hysterics. It is a part of a long-term project to decouple the Ukrainian Orthodox Church from Moscow. It is probably not an unproblematic intervention by the state in the religious sphere, according to legal experts, but it is situated in a much, much more problematic overall situation that cannot be easily compared with peaceful contexts. I mean, we have the situation one state wants to destroy the neighboring state. And look, we see that the Islamistic terror of 9/11, after that there is a stronger perception of the question of national security. According to Silvio Ferrari, let me quote, national security exigencies as a result of the September 11 attack have restricted religious freedom in at least three ways: in a general way, in which governments create new laws restricting fundamental rights, and indirectly, in which governments scrutinize religious organizations, and directly, in which governments intrude into an organization's religious beliefs, end of quotation. So these issues need to be discussed. On the level of the churches, I unfortunately see little chance of a rapprochement between the two churches in the near future, let alone unification. I mean, both church episcopates are very exclusivistic. For the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the other church has no true sacraments, and for the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, the other church would join because it has received the Thomas of Autocephaly from Constantinople. There are small dialogue initiatives among priests, but among the bishops, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is very restrictive, and the Orthodox Church of Ukraine supports parish conversions, which can be also a field of manipulation and make things no easier. The next chapter, the Russian Orthodox Church. In this presentation, the role of the Russian Orthodox Church cannot be discussed extensively. I mean, I suppose that Patriarch Kirill's theologically absurd and inhuman statements on forgiveness of sins for Russian soldiers are well known. And since the full invasion, he specially polemicized against rainbow parades from the evil West, invokes the unity of Holy Rus, but also the possible defense of his people against an enemy power. But his tragedy is, however, that the war he supports already destroyed his Russian world. And this war is not a religious war. However, the Moscow Patriarchate has a considerable share in its support. After the collapse of communism, the Moscow Patriarchate stepped into an ideological gap, became a segment of the public that is associated with Putin's regime. How to assess the question of support for the war in Ukraine and the Russian Orthodox Church in general is of course complex, because in a totalitarian system you have to take a particular account of propaganda and fear. In my opinion, however, it will not be possible to come out of all this without coming to terms with the past. And this also applies to the Soviet period, but the signs are unfortunately bad for this today. This year, the World Council of Russian People also adopted a policy document ruling out state independence for Ukraine. Russia's war is therefore a spiritually and morally holy war, as the document says. It is about defending the unified spiritual space of Holy Russia against the onslaught of globalism and the West, which, I quote, has become a victim of Satanism. Patriarch Kirill plays an important role here, and thus the head of this church is a key opinion leader of a regime that, according to Timothy Snyder, meets most criteria to be named as a fascist. For a long time, the Russian Orthodox Church is a soft power of the Kremlin, and although this myth of Russian world cannot be precisely defined, it exists in different versions, it's somehow powerful, whereby a radicalization can be observed under Patriarch Kirill. And you know, in Orthodoxy there is a discussion if it should be condemned as a heresy. Image of history also play a role to argue for this war. This became clear in Putin's programmatic essay of July 12, 2021 on the historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians. Andreas Kappeler from the Eastern European History faculty in Vienna has stated that this is an interpretation of history, let me quote, in which Soviet patriotism, imperial and Russian ethno-nationalism and revisionistic thinking are mixed. For Putin, Ukraine is an anti-Russia behind which there is a Western conspiracy, end of quotation. In any case, Putin does not recognize the Ukrainians as a separate nation with an independent state. He refers to the ancient Rus, which is then interpreted in terms of the Russians, giving connecting with language and orthodoxy. On February 21st, 22, Putin declared that today's Ukraine was created by Bolshevik Russia, and openly threatened those who would try to, quotation, use our historical territories and the people close to us who live there against Russia, end of quotation. So, as my colleague in Vienna, the historian Wolfgang Müller emphasized, this view goes back to the 19th century, when today's Ukraine was divided between Russia and the Habsburg monarchy, and the Ukrainian independence movement was suppressed within Russia. There was and still is the theory that Ukraine was never a nation, should not be one. However, since the 9th century, as we see, there has been a state on the territory of today's Ukraine, also part of today's Russia, the Kievan Rus. There was then no longer a common statehood on this territory. It was divided up, and for a long time there was Mongol Tatar rule, as well Poland and Lithuania. In this field of tension, a separate identity emerged through the so-called Cossacks since the 15th century. So there are different steps and parts. Western Ukraine was a part of the Habsburg Empire, and after the Second World War there was a very short-lived Western Ukrainian and the Ukrainian People Republic. Then the Soviet Union came with a Holodomor, the deliberately induced famine, and statehood returned in 91. So I also want to mention that Russia and Ukraine, whose history is somehow linked to the Soviet Union, are also different in terms of authoritarian state traditions and the role of civil society. In Ukraine, it is not possible for church and state to be interrelated and ideologically intertwined, to be intertwined as in Russia. And for all the countries, post-Soviet problems, the revolutions of 2004 and 2014 demonstrate a vivid civil society. Many observers in the West were surprised that there is a really strong United Nations behind the determined resistance, and while that Putin has also not understood Ukraine and its recent developments. The Russian Orthodox Church's complicity is not concerned with theological content, but with components such as nationalism, authoritarianism, mistrust of democracy, individualism, anti-Westernism, and anti-liberalism. There are statements in Russian Orthodox Church documents, for example, on human rights, which reveal earlier problematic tendencies, such as the relationship between the individual and the state, where society with its plurality as a social space come up short. Also, the churches in Ukraine, at least partially, have learned on the Maidan that society as a partner is even more important than the state. So this is also why I am a bit critical of recent attempts to promote the Orthodox Church of Ukraine as a kind of new state supporting church. After all, problems such as a lack of coming to terms with the past, a close relationship with the state, dualism, authoritarianism, passivity in society, do not stop at church or denominational boundaries. They can be found in Orthodoxy, but not only there. Also, the missing of solid social teaching is a problem. And regarding Orthodoxy, I mean, unfortunately, apart from Patriarch Bartholomew, practically very few Orthodox church leaders have made more or less clear statements on this war. I mean, in the light of the destruction that is happening in front of the world, it's really regrettable if some Orthodox hierarchs even accuse Ukrainians now of Russophobia or the Ukrainian state of persecuting Orthodoxy, because in such a case, perpetrators and victims are sometimes even reversed. Now, the next topic is Pope Francis and Ukraine. I mean, the ambivalent role of Pope Francis has been already extensively discussed. This issue is related to the Catholic Church's diplomacy, but also has ideological and theological aspects. The Vatican's Ostpolitik was and is determined by a concept of diplomatic neutrality, which raises questions regarding moral neutrality. Pope Francis shows skeptical political views regarding the United States, influenced by the global South, let's say, has some romantic ideas about Russia as a great civilization, and not just once this caused irritation in Ukrainian society and distancing on the part of church representatives, especially from the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church and its head. In 2022 and 23, the Roman Curia organized on Holy Friday crossroads in the Colosseum, in each of which an Ukrainian and a Russian persons were linked. And the Roman Curia gave somehow the impression of being above things and disregarding the victim's perspective. And you see, there is maybe a premature time to speak of reconciliation when the victim is still struggling to survive and the perpetrator is still in action. And this caused also theological criticism, for example, by Miroslav Marinovich, the vice rector of the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, as he distinguished between the one cross of Jesus and the different crosses of the victim and the perpetrator. And let's say it's a bit strange in view of church sexual abuse scandals in the Catholic Church that there is not enough awareness of how easily expressions like forgiveness, but also the appeal to the cross can be instrumentalized. And also later statements about hoist the white flag is also very problematic. The Vatican has subsequently stated that it is not about surrender, but many Ukrainians were really upset. I mean, why is something like this addressed to Ukraine, which is fighting for survival and not to the aggressor? And Kremlins and signs as this would be a confirmation to continue. And let me state this problem is not just about Ukraine. If the shifting of international borders is not outlawed, other dictators will feel also see this possibility. According to the religion and peace researcher Jose Casanova, also many academics were forced by this war to recognize that they had also looked at Ukraine through Russian imperial and colonistic perspective. So we can say somehow that there is the accusation that the Pope doesn't understand Ukraine. Sometimes also Ukraine doesn't understand really the Pope diplomacy. And in any case, we have also stressed on the other side that Vatican is helping very much regarding humanitarian aid and to have diplomacy in the background. So, of course, there are different aspects. And these lead to the question of peace ethics and reconciliation, because Pope Francis' policy on Ukraine also highlights the dilemma that non-violence cannot protect the weak. So pacifistic approaches to aggressors often do not help the affected. So in this context, the question of just war has been raised in the discussion about Pope Francis' encyclical Fratelli Tutti from 2020. It offers a thoroughly impressive human vision of peace, but does not unfold a systematic doctrine on war and peace. The war against Ukraine has made weak points visible. According to Pavlo Smitsnyuk, an Ukrainian theologian, there is an unresolved tension between just war and non-violence, which is also evident in the Pope's attitude towards the war against Ukraine. So ethical paradigm reaches sometimes their limits when faced with an aggressor who is only willing to begin to talk if his maximum demands are unconditionally met. And that's also the problem with ecumenism. The full-scale invasion of Russia also poses many questions to previous paradigms and patterns of behavior in ecumenism. And not surprisingly, the question of the Russian Orthodox Church's participation erupted at the 22 General Assembly of the World Council of Churches. The WCC, after this time, not once allowed an instrumentalization by the Russian propaganda during the last years. So when representatives of this body, the heads Johan Sauka and Jerry Pillay, say that they do not want to enter in political sphere, but that Christ is in the center of the dialogue, then they, however, should be aware of the existing political readings of this conflict. Stefan Kube writes, when, for example, Pillay wrote that nationalism should be set aside, as if the core of the problem here were really the juxtaposition of Russian nationalism and Ukrainian nationalism. So really, so a human ethic is needed for the interlocutors. And the war against Ukraine confronts also the churches to fundamentally question their own positions, how to deal with such a war of aggression. Often there is an ignorance both of the motivation of those affected who are resisting, why they are resisting for the sake of a perspective of life, and also of the political circumstances. Further, by invoking the theory of civil resistance, one overlooks a civil society's experience with state violence in the post-Soviet space. So also till 22, many churches in the West and also the WCC were very much fixated on the dialogue with the Russian Orthodox Church, not infrequently adopting its assessments and failing to perceive Ukraine and its churches as subjects, which also happens when the war is seen as a proxy war between great powers. Challenges for theology, and this is now my last chapter. Theology means reflection which comes from and happens in the respective churches, but which also requires academic freedom. Theology cannot simply be the teaching of the church's doctrine, and especially when it comes to dealing with problems like power, use and abuse of it, then there are difficulties. There is often an amalgam of non-theological, ideological factors that also affect the actions of church leaders, as it is shown by the anti-Western propaganda in Patriarch Kirill's sermons. However, certain illiberal tendencies can be seen in the context of anti-gender discourse, also in the religious sector of Ukraine and also in my own church. I mean, when churches try to stop unwanted discussions about paradigm shifts in moral or ethical issues. I mean, it's noticeable that in the documents of the Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, such issues are given far more attention, these gender issues, homosexuality, more attention than issues of peace building or reconciliation. And maybe paradoxically, but this war is not a fight against a very liberal Christianity in Ukraine. So academic theology, in exchange with other disciplines, can contribute significantly to a more reflective approach to the social role of religion, and also take on a control function within the church or promote more inner church participation. I mean, questions arise about the value of much vaunted Orthodox synodality when church leaders assume the role of warmongers. Critical dissenting voices are stifled. Also on the global level, fundamentalism and ideologization have a negative impact in orthodoxy today. At the same time, orthodoxy sensitivity to the relativity of human speaking of God offers, I think, a good starting point for a reflective Christianity in the context of modernity, also including the focus on individual responsibility. In the Catholic Church, Eastern Catholic theology offers, besides its link to Catholic doctrine, also orientation to theological approaches of orthodoxy, as well as to the ancient church, which offers both an inner plurality and a distance from extreme positions. So the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church is also theologically, doctrinally a conservative, yet this church can point to well-trained theologians and a high level of civic engagement in Ukraine. The fact that the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church has allowed historical criticism in examining its own union history could be also used to make its theological work more open. And when will the Russian Orthodox Church be ready to take a critical look at the period of the 20th century? Another point is it will be also an important theological challenge to bring the divided Orthodox churches in Ukraine closer together. The hierarchies are marked by exclusivist ideas, and they are currently in a competitive situation. The priests and also the faithful have an important role to play in this development. And Ukrainian society is deeply influenced by a Christian tradition, even aside of institutional religiosity, but also by growing secularism. But is this so bad for the churches? I mean, freedom is a valuable asset also for the churches, because they don't have a monopoly on the message of hope. For keeping access to God open in a secular, increasingly secular context, this requires for theology a positive approach to freedom as a prerequisite of responsibility. And it is precisely the struggle for freedom and dignity that represents an essential dimension in this war. This discourses take place on several levels. I can show you also some pictures of artists that reflect the spiritual and religious treatment of the war in a very different way. So here is an icon by Olenka Zahorodnik, and here you see the hand of a killed woman in Bucha. So there are artists who try to keep remembrance for the killed in Ukraine. And there are also Christian icons or pictures here by Uliana Krechovets from Lviv, who made for the Holy Week in 22 a picture of the Plashenitsa. You know, here the people protection, you see the soldiers here, the cross of Christ. So there are really different expressions where Christianity, how to say, is a part in society. And there are two books also which I would like to show you later. The Ukrainian Catholic University published this book. Both books are online also, The Churches and the War, Religious Diplomacy and Russia's Aggression Against Ukraine. A lot of articles, and one volume of review of ecumenical studies published in Sibiu Res, edited by Regina Elsner and me, with the title The War in Ukraine and the Religious Communities. They are German and English articles. So it's important that Ukrainian Christianity recognizes and integrates all the good that is currently happening in society, and also the society expects from the church ethical orientation and moral support. And I have to go now back to Pope Francis again. I mean, I do not agree with him that, as he said once, the barking of NATO at the gates of Russia was decisive for the war. No, it was much more the Maidan 2013-14, the revolution of dignity, that Putin did not want to tolerate this in his neighborhood. There is the question where the war is rooted. And the German social ethicist Heinz-Gerhard Justenhofen stated, let me quote, that Russia's war against Ukraine is rooted in the debate as to what kind of social and political order is to prevail in the post-Soviet states. And also states that the struggle within Ukraine for state and social order was at the same time always also a power struggle between a democratic and an authoritarian government. So the fact that Pope Francis' statements regarding Russia and Ukraine have been regarded as painful there can become also a chance for an emerging adult relationship with authority in the church, not only in the Catholic Church. The war against Ukraine has sharpened the eye on the abuse of religion. However, an intellectual space for debate and criticism inside the churches is also needed. Thus, it is important that theologians name insufficiently treated or delicate aspects. For example, Pavlos Mitsniuk refers regarding the need for peace building to the moderate approach of the Greek Catholic Metropolitan Andrei Sheptitsky, and stated, let me quote, while at this stage of the war, any active peace building and reconciliation between Ukraine and Russia might be precocious, Ukrainian churches can prepare ground for it even today. I would propose 3 areas where this could be done: dealing with collective blaming and dehumanizing language, development of reflection on just peace, reconciliation and healing, and keeping ecclesial autonomy from the state. End of quotation. In Ukraine, the churches can provide valuable assistance, also addressing delicate topics like reconciliation. For example, in his video message on March 8, 22, for the Sunday of Reconciliation, the beginning of Great Land, the head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, Major Archbishop Sviatoslav, spoke about the difficulty of, let me quote, speaking of forgiveness in the midst of war, end of quotation, but that this is the secret of victory that God grants. So Sviatoslav called for asking forgiveness for one's own sins and those of the nation, but also to pray for one's enemies that God may stop them. And this war conference, countless people with existential question. I mean, where was God in Bucha, in Mariupol? And churches are called to help of enduring the war with all its suffering, to act in a therapeutic way. They can contribute to a constructive approach with guilt, repentance, and giving the victims a voice. And this requires constant reference both to the reality and to the core of Christian message. And after the end of the war, the churches will be challenged with peace work and a healing of memory, because this war is also a tragedy for many people in Russia. Even if this may sound premature from today's perspective, this also applies a perspective for building a human civilization there. And so, with all these challenges described, churches need a reflective approach, an exchange with society to promote justice and respect for human dignity. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Thomas, for a splendid lecture.
Thank you very much. It's very important that we say, very important for all of us, because we see our society is good. Our society is very interesting because we came from atheistic society in communist era to church just after the beginning of 19th. In this case, today we're also in some kind of turbulence because it's very difficult to understand. I think that the most important for all of us to understand that church and the values of Christians, it's common for all of us. Unfortunately, today, first of all, Russian church tried to push some other ideas, first of all, of Russian Empire. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, Ukrainians took part in and founded this in 17th century, as you mentioned before. And today, the situation with this is very difficult for all of us. And first of all, our society came back from communist ideology to church. Now, unfortunately, we are in this cross border and can't understand what is the values of the church. To come to Ruski Mir with when Russian popes try to cross Satana. Satana is, as you know, the rocket of that they missile that they target to Ukraine. So it's very interesting when you will see this picture. Russian popes gave their, I don't know this word in English, but they cross the Satana. It's very symbolic for all of us. So thank you very much. Unfortunately, I would be glad to continue this discussion, but I have to go. Sorry.
I am very thankful for your presence, and if there is a possibility for collaboration, it will be for me a pleasure. Thank you very much.
If you look at that,
Thank
you.
Thank you to Ambassador. Very fruitful lecture, many information to think about, pondering, and I open the floor for the questions. Yes, please. The mic.
Yeah, thank you for your lecture. My name is Andre. I'm a researcher here at the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory. So my question for you would be, all right, we can understand that there is a political dimension to the current schism that we have in the Orthodoxy. So specifically in Ukraine, I understand that the Moscow Patriarchy wants to hold a grip on the church in Ukraine because it, gives them a mechanism to apply their soft power in Ukraine. That's understandable for me, but I would like to know whether the Moscow Patriarchy uses any theological arguments of why it should still be present in Ukraine. Thank you.
Yes, that's an interesting question. I mean, I am not from the Moscow Patriarchate, so it's difficult for me to tell this so directly, because there are some arguments which are not really theological, but they are socio-cultural, theological, like that there is a unity of the Holy Rus or Kievan Rus, and it is a unity. There is the idea that there is a threefold unity of Russia, Belarus and Ukraine, which should not separate it, and that they are one people, so that the collapse of the Soviet Union was somehow a tragedy. And I mean, in fact, really the Russian Orthodox Church is the last institution which, has this big territory. So I think this is more a question of power, because there is autocephaly in Orthodoxy, but often it was promoted in the 19th and 20th century, and there is no mechanism in Orthodoxy generally accepted how to get autocephaly. So this is very often a field of battle. But I mean, from the message of the gospel, or also the church tradition, there is no convincing argument, in my opinion, why this church should be, remain as only one autocephalous church. But I would say, I'm a Catholic, it's bit difficult for me to say, in the name of other churches.
Thank you. More question? We have also people online. If there is a question from Zoom. Okay, I want to clarify something. I was really surprised by the numbers you gave us. Here, it's kind of a common like view that Ukrainian Orthodox Church is the major church in Ukraine. That most of the believers, Orthodox believers, are part of this church, and there is that Orthodox Church of Ukraine is a political project. Now, I'm really surprised by the numbers. It's like that the fair majority of Orthodox Christians in Ukraine are actually members of Orthodox Church of Ukraine, with 42%.
Yes.
And then we have like a just Orthodox, which is like a 13%. Is this kind of a numbers? How to define these numbers? Are there kind of practicants, people who attend services, or that's
I try to go back to this.
Yeah, that's
yes. So look, it is a difficult issue to really count the church membership, because these are surveys. I don't know, maybe 2,000 people are asked by the Razumkov Center. And most of Ukrainian population is Orthodox, so they are baptized Orthodox people, but religiosity is quite strong in the Western Ukraine, where the Catholic Church dominates. In the East, it's less strong. And I mean, we have a big number of people who are baptized, who feel culturally or generally spiritually Orthodox, but really don't practice. So there was often the argument by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that the churches of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine are empty when they have, for example, the all-night vigil, because, how to say, the very practicing Orthodox people, they don't go only to the Holy Liturgy, but also to the all-night vigil, and then you can see that the churches of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is here counted with 6%, are full, and that of the other church are empty, quite empty, because, you know, I mean, this is also a question of sympathy. You don't have a state registration of your religious affiliation, so you can just say, well, I will go to this parish, and maybe the parish priest asks you, and then you make a confession or somehow join the church. But I mean, this is not a high bureaucratic level, so it's not like in Germany or Austria, where it's really not so easy. You must go to an office. So in that case, it's often so that in Ukraine now generally there is a big criticism of the Russian Orthodox Church, and people, even if they maybe go to a church where Onufri is commemorated, well, maybe they don't tell it. So that's why it's difficult to say. And so, but it was before 22. Many experts said that if you count the Eucharistic communities, then the Ukrainian Orthodox Church might be stronger. But how this develops, how to say, when you have a big number of low-level religiosity, it's difficult to say who is for you Orthodox, who goes every Sunday to church, or who goes to Pascha or something. Yeah, but it's an interesting issue, and yeah, it's not easy to say who is stronger.
Yes, please.
Thanks. Yes, I also had a question regarding the numbers. So, is this has been done in November 2023?
Yeah, I'm sitting here in front
on
of
the
it.
territories.
So the survey is November 23,
right.
And the religious communities is from the DESS homepage from the beginning of 24.
So I was wondering whether the occupied parts of the Ukraine, Crimea and the eastern oblasts, would be included into this type of statistics.
They cannot
Because,
be taken.
yes, sure, but I mean, if we take a look at if you could shed light on previous census and other stuff, so how many, if we look entire Ukrainian territory, even the occupied parts, whether the Russian-speaking population would adhere to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, or would they adhere to the Russian Orthodox Church? Like, how would the total number of people of Ukraine affect the statistical distribution?
That's a difficult issue, because many persons also left the territories, the occupied territories where they formerly lived, but they are now in the rest of Ukraine and can be among the number of those asked. On the other hand, I mean, of course, in the occupied territories, mostly the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate is dominating, so maybe this would change the number. And I mean, 6% is also very low. So if you wish, go to the website of the Razunkov Center, then you will see that it rapidly changed now during the last 2-3 years. So they were much more closer even. Yeah. And those only Orthodox, there are now lower. Formerly there was a bigger number even, but now the affiliation is clearer, that I want to belong to this or them. But I mean, you know, it's quite easy to say in an exit poll, I belong to this or that. So you know, there is also local tradition. I mean, if on a certain place there is a church where your ancestors went to the church and it changed jurisdiction, maybe for the people it's even not so important which jurisdiction it is. So you don't have such a strong connection, institutional connection also to one or another church. I would suppose, yeah.
More questions? Okay, then let us thank once more to Professor Németh for his great lecture.
Thank you very much for the invitation and your presence. And I would be also glad if we can keep in touch. I mean, other parts of my research are connected to Serbia, to the history of the churches in the Habsburg Empire. So if you are interested either in this topic or the other one, I would be glad if we can continue.
May I, sorry for, I didn't see the question coming on Zoom. For Olja Stasiuk, thank you very much for your lecture. What are the possibilities of holding the Russian Orthodox Church or Ukrainian Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate accountable in the cases where the collaboration and aid in tortures, murders, and other types of oppressions at the temporarily occupied territories towards other religious community are proved?
Sorry, I didn't get the full question. So what are the possible, may I take the
Yeah, of course, you can, yes.
This is maybe about the possibilities for the state, what they can do. Well,
that's
very difficult there because they don't have influence. But maybe, I forgot maybe to say an aspect. I mean, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church has now also the difficult choice what to do. I mean, they don't want to unify with the Epiphany Church because there are also, how to say, personal experience, you know, from the time schismatics and so. That's a difficult question, but what are alternatives? I mean, to get autocephaly acknowledged by whom? By the ecumenical patriarchate, whom they did not recognize as a part, or with whom they don't have communion now as a part of the Moscow Patriarchate. Maybe there was also the idea to create an own unity, exarchate of the ecumenical patriarchate, but Constantinople said that they won't give a second Tomos because one is already for Ukraine, so they won't do the same thing again. So that's also difficult for the church in what direction to act. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you once more.
Thank you.